Welcome to the webinar, The Power of Regenerative Agriculture to Help Address Climate Change. While this event is part of 350 Chicago's regular monthly speakers event, this one is special because it's co-sponsored with 4 of our fellow 350 chapters: 350 MARIN, 350 Triangle, 350 Colorado, and 350 Wisconsin. And I want to thank everyone at those chapters for all their help putting this webinar together and all the help, especially promoting the webinar. Since 350's mission is all about ending climate change, this webinar's main focus is on how regenerative farming can be a major force in helping us in our efforts to stop climate change. However, our panelists are also going to talk about the many other benefits of regenerative farming, because there are many other major issues that regenerative agriculture, as you may know, can definitely help us with. Okay, time for our first speaker. I'm very excited about this. I teach the film Kiss the Ground, and I've been teaching it for years, so I've seen it about 17 times. So it's really good to hear and speak with Gabe Brown in person. Gabe Brown is a long practicing regenerative farmer, author of the book From Dirt to Soil, advocate, and much, much more. He is featured prominently in the Regenerative Agriculture documentary Features Kiss the Ground and Common Ground. Everyone, please welcome Gabe Brown. Take it away, Gabe.
Thank you, Rich. It's a real pleasure to be with everybody today. Glad to be here. I'm going to pull up my slideshow and begin talking to you about something that's near and dear to me, and that is truly the hope that is in healthy soil. And I really believe humanity is facing a lot of challenges. However, they're not insurmountable. And although agriculture is not to blame for all of these challenges, we certainly need to take our share of the blame. And we can use regenerative agriculture to mitigate many of the things we're seeing today. You know, no matter where I travel, and I travel extensively all over the world, people think of climate change affecting them in different ways. You know, that may be in the form of severe drought, and we see ever increasing desertification all over the world. Tens of thousands of acres are becoming desertified annually. And I'll get into why I think that is so. We're seeing poor soil function. This is a photo I actually took in my home state of North Dakota. And this is common wherever I travel, that if we have a rainfall event of even 1/2 of an inch, that is not able to infiltrate into the soil. That's not due to climate change. It's due to the practices that are taking place on the landscape. Of course, if we can't infiltrate water, then we have flooding issues. You know, every year, more and more communities are being negatively affected by flooding. Of course, along with that flooding comes water quality issues. You know, a lot of the nutrients, pesticides, fungicides, other synthetics that are applied in agricultural production leave those fields and end up in the watersheds. This negatively impacts not only the farmer, but also the communities downstream and those ecosystems downstream. We're seeing a real issue around the world with impoverishment in many communities, especially our rural communities and our inner cities. A lot of it in the rural communities is due to the fact that agriculture has become very, very large, and profitability is minimal. And because of that, our small towns are drying up, our school systems are closing, communities are suffering. One of the things that's near and dear to me, and should be near and dear to every one of us, is we have to understand that we are in the midst of a human health crisis. You look, for instance, in the United States spends more on healthcare per capita than any other country in the world. Yet we're at the top or near the top in ADD, ADHD, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, autoimmune diseases, cancer, and the list goes on. Now, is agriculture to blame for all of this? No. But as I'll show you, it certainly is to blame for a part of it. You see, I think as mankind, we can agree on 85 to 90% of the issues. Why don't we come together and find common ground for common good? And I really believe, as I hope to lay out for you this evening, that regenerative agriculture shows us the opportunity to find common ground for common good. First, I think we need to define regenerative agriculture. This is the definition that I prefer. It's simply farming and ranching in synchrony with nature to repair, rebuild, restore, and revitalize ecosystem function, starting with all life in the soil and expanding to all life above the soil. I feel that's all encompassing, and all of us can resonate with this definition. Now, in order to practice regenerative agriculture, we need to understand that there's 6 underlying principles of soil health. Those are, briefly, number 1, context. You must farm and ranch within the context of your environment. I tell people there's a reason bananas don't grow in North Dakota. It's out of context with our environment. Too often in agriculture today, we're seeing farmers and ranchers operating outside of their context. They're trying to push the environment ecologically to greater and greater yields. This is at a cost to the ecosystem itself. The second principle is to minimize disturbance, whether it be tillage, whether it be synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, fungicides. These are all detrimental to soil health. Third principle is cover and build armor on the surface. Where in nature do you see bare soil? Walk into a forest, it's covered with leaves and pine needles. Walk into a prairie ecosystems, it's covered with decaying plant material. The fourth principle is that of diversity. Nature abhors a monoculture. It thrives on diversity. Yet what do we do in agriculture today? We focus on monoculture production. The fifth principle is to keep living roots in the soil as long as possible throughout the year. You know, here on the northern plains, spring of the year, when there's snow on the ground, we often see crocuses pushing up through that snow. Nature is trying to capture that solar energy. It wants living roots in the soil to drive that energy cycle as long as possible. Yet, what happens in agriculture? A crop is grown and then that land sits idle, not functioning properly. And the sixth principle is grow healthy animals and soil together. Nature does not function properly without animals and insects. Yet so often today we remove the animals from the landscape, which actually accelerates desertification. And these six principles then drive the four ecosystem processes. The energy cycle, in other words, photosynthesis. The water cycle, which is that of aggregates in the soil, allowing water to infiltrate into the soil, move throughout the soil profile, and being held in that soil by large amounts of carbon that are derived from the energy cycle. The mineral cycle, which is that of the natural process of soil microbiology, bringing nutrients to the plants. And I'll talk more about that later. And the fourth ecosystem process is that of biodiversity. Again, nature abhors a monoculture. It thrives on diversity. So how do we do that? I briefly put some slides together to show that. Minimal disturbance. Here we are planting vegetables into a no-till field. For you gardeners out there, the absolutely worst thing you can do to your garden is to till that soil. Besides adding synthetics, of course. Go ahead and no-till that garden. My personal garden has been no-tilled for over 30 years, and it's a thriving ecosystem. Keep armor on the soil surface. In this particular picture, you can see between the corn rows, you see that armor of that rolled down cover crop that protects the soil from wind erosion, water erosion, and evaporation. This is a diverse polyculture mix. Many producers, farmers who are using these regenerative practices are now growing what we call polyculture cash crops. This is actually a mix of 4 different cash crops grown together, harvested together. This particular field is thriving on that diversity. I might add, there's 0 synthetic input on that field. Living root in the soil as long as possible throughout the year. Take a look at this photo. I know your eyes gravitate to that flower, but look at all the other species in this photo. That's how nature functions properly. And then the final principle is that of animal integration. We need to get animals out of the lot onto the landscape. Soil can never be as healthy without animals as it is with animals. We want to grow diversity and grow life. That's what regenerative agriculture is all about. I put this slide in here to emphasize the point. For every insect species that's a pest, there's 1,700 species that are either beneficial or indifferent, meaning they won't help you or hurt you. Why does society today focus on killing that pest when we should be focused on providing the home and habitat for all the beneficial insects? If we do that, we're going to regenerate soils. The slide you see before you now, on the right is obviously the soil that we started with. 3 years later, that's the same field on the left-hand side of this photo. It's amazing how quickly we can regenerate our soils. And when you're in it a while, you can get soil like that in the back of this photo. So these are the same soil types, side by side, fields literally across the fence row from each other. The soil in the foreground can infiltrate less than 1/2 inch per hour. It's 1.7% organic matter. The soil in the background started like that 20 plus years ago. Today, that soil is 9.4% organic matter. It can infiltrate an astounding 32 inches of rainfall per hour. It's highly functioning and has not seen any synthetics in over 17 years. What that leads, that healthy soil, is this. It leads to thriving soil microbiology. There's more microorganisms in a teaspoonful of healthy soil than there are people on this planet. And it's those microorganisms that bring plants the nutrients they need. Take a look at these 2 eggs. It's very obvious to see which is going to be higher in these phytonutrient compounds. We're involved in some groundbreaking research now with Dr. Stefan Van Vliet, Utah State University, which is comparing the phytonutrients found in food grown in and on healthy soil, comparing that to the same grains, fruits, vegetables, and proteins grown in unhealthy soil. Dr. Van Vliet can quantify over 2,300 different phytonutrient compounds. And what he has found is amazing. Food grown in and on healthy soils up to 64% higher in vitamins, up to 239% higher in fatty acid profiles, up to 67% lower in oxidative stress markers. That's leading to less heart attacks, etc. We truly can find common good through regenerative agriculture, whether it be addressing climate issues, water quality, air quality issues, nutrient density of food, biodiversity and ecosystem function, a reduction or elimination in the use of synthetics, fertilizers, pesticides. On-farm profitability increases. Dr. Jonathan Lundgren has some groundbreaking research that shows regenerative farms and ranchers have 76% greater profitability. Another thing it can do is provide humane conditions for animals and the humans working on those farms and ranches. With that, I'll pass it on. Thank you.
I'll continue on the introduction for Anya. Okay, so Anya was raised in the Midwest. Her work is influenced by her experience on her 10-acre Anya farm. Overall, she explores the relationship between soil, farming, food, nutrition, and health, and she works to create biodiverse systems that are responsive to climate challenges. Anya is the assistant director at I-REGEN at the University of Illinois, and she's also the founder of Connect Research Consulting and Design, and she's the developer of the Connect theory. So welcome, Anya. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great. Thank you, Jody. And thank you, Gabe, for the great presentation. I have had the privilege of giving this talk alongside Erin Meyers from BASIL'S Harvest a few times now, and now with Gabe. So thank you, Chicago 350, for that opportunity. As Jody mentioned, I spent the last 15 years doing research at the University of Illinois in neuroscience, agriculture, both conventional and regenerative, nutrition, systems engineering, and also putting all these principles into practice in my daily life as a routine. My childhood was filled with gardening, canning, food preservation, sewing, cooking, hauling grain to elevators, and being raised by a crew of engineers, farmers, soil scientists, nurses, and nutritionists. I made use of all of that knowledge in short order through application. And while those topics are very broad, all are very interconnected, as you'll see in just a little bit. And I made use of those connections because they were of critical importance for me personally and my survival, because I have a life-shortening disease called cystic fibrosis, or CF for short. Okay, just a little bit about cystic fibrosis. So it affects 70,000 people worldwide, 30,000 in the United States. It's a chronic, progressive, and fatal genetic inherited disease to which there is no cure at present. So when I was born, the life expectancy for a person born with CF was 14 years old. Today it is 37.5 for those who were born before 2017. And then for those born after 2017, it's about 53 now. And that's just because of new medications and antibiotics. And so as you can see in the image here, cystic fibrosis occurs because there's a defective mutation in the gene, and that's called the cystic fibrosis transmembrane conductance regulator, or the CFTR gene, which is much easier to say. And what that does is it changes the protein that regulates the movement of sodium chloride, calcium, and potassium in and out of the cells. And as a result, all membranes in your body are affected by a very thick and sticky mucus. So what is it like to live with cystic fibrosis? We'll start with the lungs. In the lungs, mucus ends up clogging the airways and then traps bacteria, which leads to infections, extensive lung damage, and eventually respiratory failure. And that same mucus clogs the sinuses, so it feels kind of like having pneumonia or a chest or head cold every day. And it also causes frequent infections, excuse me, which called daily fevers or frequent fevers, and coughing up blood, things of that nature, which usually require intensive month-long intravenous antibiotic rounds, which help to fight those infections. So since I've been born, I've gone through 23 rounds of those IV antibiotics. And daily treatments for patients involves percussive airway clearance, or a device called a vest that basically beats your chest and helps to mobilize that mucus out of your lungs. And that gets coupled with bronchial dilators and inhaled antibiotics that takes about 3 to 4 hours per day. And thankfully, I have a mobile form of the vest, so I take that everywhere I go, along with a lunchbox, which is filled with about 20 pounds of food. And so why the 20 pounds of food? So the pancreas is also affected, and being that it's both endocrine and exocrine, it causes problems for food absorption. And so I take enzymes with everything that I eat in order to digest my food. And later in life, CF patients develop CF-related diabetes because the pancreas gradually shuts down, and then you add in insulin eventually. So thankfully, I learned a lot about nutrition early on, and how to train my behaviors to match with what my body needs. And with trial and error, I learned how to make those foods more desirable in the preparation or the taste, and using some food chemistry to couple up different foods. And now I use that same knowledge to deliver regeneratively grown food to farmers during their busy seasons through Meals to Fields, which I'll show a little bit later. Of the other organs that are affected, there's the reproductive system, which usually means for men that they can't reproduce, and women, they have limited abilities. And then eventually for the heart, you go into right side heart failure because the heart wasn't meant to run a marathon for the many years that you get to live through clearing out the mucus and things like that. So this illustration does a nice job of showing those different things that are affected, but of importance for us today is how it affects the lungs and the pancreas. So as one can imagine, there's significant time commitment that goes into maintaining the disease. And there's a recent film that came out right before COVID where the lead actress who has CF mentions that by the age of 13, most CF patients have become their own doctor as a result of attaining that knowledge that they need to stay alive. So most patients have to come up with their own intrinsic agency to being able to clear out that mucus every day and exercise and eat enough food to keep up with the caloric intensive need, which is part of why I bought my family farm. I would like to think that one day, if there was a cure and I could put the amount of energy that I do into staying alive, I would be Captain Marvel. Plus, as many of my friends and family can attest to, I could probably get hit by a bus and get up and walk away to do the next thing in life. And for those who are familiar with Marvel films, there's a scene where she gets knocked down repeatedly only to get back up every time and finally break free. And that resonates with how I feel every single day. So thankfully, I've spent the majority of my time researching, learning, and applying this through mapping the connections from soil to human health. So as the disease progressed, I realized that if I was going to stay alive, I would have to engineer the heck out of it. So 25 years ago, I began to journal everything from what I ate to what I did for exercise, to my bacteria, to my microbiome or gut microbiome, to the enzymes, hormones, pathways, acidity, you name it. And so that generated a system for me, or built essentially a decision tree that had a series of connecting points that became the preliminary data for the Connect theory. And this theory works under the assumption that everything is connected. So I started to build these connecting points between soil, food, farm, and health. And much like a farmer has to wear many hats when they do their job, from being the bookkeeper to the agronomist to the mechanic to the CEO who decides when to go, I had to do the same with being my own nurse, dietitian, gardener, and more. All right, so with my excessive food intake and my immune compromised systems, I began to notice that the spinach that I can grow in my garden is not only of higher nutritional quality than something that was shipped thousands of miles, but it also gave my body better facility and agency to regenerate the cells, increasing my immune system defense, and retain my gut microbial content. And that essentially translated into being able to absorb those crucial nutrients and vitamins, which also have their own interconnected components that without each other don't typically work. And I incorporated food into my diet, such as yogurt, kefir, honey, raisins, sauerkraut, ginger, and more, which all are in a list that go into antibacterial properties, stable sources of energy, sugar, and nutrients. And they're protective for my organs and my immune system. And they serve as agents for my gut microbiome to stay healthy. One cornerstone of all of those foods is purchasing them locally or regeneratively growing them myself. And so this not only supports the community, but it also carries with it a familiarity assimilation potential for my own body to readily absorb it. All right, so let's go through those connections. So if your produce comes from the soil and you are what you eat, let's go back. So the produce comes from the soil, you eat the produce, and you are what you eat, then it matters what we put in our bodies and our soils, of course. And the best mechanism to building that healthy soil and healthy people is to create a hospitable environment for microorganisms, biodiversity, and resilience. And much like Gabe highlighted before, not depleting those pools is a part of what we have left as our survival, or my personal survival in dealing with a disease. So as I mentioned before, CF patients get frequent lung infections, or in my case, they maintain a constant ecosystem in their lungs. And those bacteria often require intensive IV antibiotics to clear out the bacteria. And the difficulty here is that much like the Roundup that we do with our soils, we deplete that good bacteria and the microbiome present as well. So without that soil microbial presence or the gut microbiome, we essentially rob our soils or our bodies of that binding agent that's needed to absorb and uptake and digest vital properties, nutrients, and essentially convert it into energy. So without aggregate and microbial material present in the soils and our bodies, we can apply all kinds of fertilizer or foods, but it will just get flushed out into our waterways, which will then contribute to more soil erosion, the hypoxic zone, and environmental destruction. Or in the case of the gut, it goes down the toilet. So for me, maintaining that microbiome and diversity has been essential for my survival in both my soils and my body. Okay, so outlining some of the regenerative practices that I know Gabe just mentioned, essentially what we're talking about is keeping that rich soil profile. So that soil microbiome provides a host of ecosystem and plant services that not only support that carbon sequestration, but also work to mitigate climate change and filter back into our diets through a microbial passageway. And that makes for more nutritious, higher quality produce that then gets harvested from those soils. From an ecosystem service, or from ecosystem services that are maintained through that, there's increased carbon sequestration, decreased greenhouse gas emissions, increased biodiversity, decreased nitrate leaching and runoff, decreased soil erosion, and of course, increased water use efficiency as well. And for the microbiome, plants are able to have more better nutrient acquisition and uptake, and they have more defenses against pathogens as well. And we build resilience essentially to some of those droughts and floods and environmental stressors that Gabe mentioned and showed great photos about for climate change. Okay, one other thing that he mentioned, which I know I personally employ on my farm, is making sure that I'm not doing more destructive tillage So conventional tillage efforts often don't preserve or support any of that robust soil microbiome that needs to be present to keep the environment buffered against those climate change problems that we just listed. It strips the soil of a lot of coverage and removes all the microbial matter that's necessary for capturing the nutrients. And so as you can see in these photos, it's a good representative, especially the top one, of the soil erosion that occurs as it's not covered and the winds seem to carry it away. And then, of course, the hypoxic zone, which was mentioned before as well. All right, so regenerative agriculture approaches focusing on creating a stable soil environment so that it can increase the microbial abundance. And this is accomplished through a number of mechanisms, which we just mentioned, reducing tillage. But you can also apply compost or fertilizer, or retain the biomass after a harvest, or add a cover crop so that it reduces erosion and adds in microbial diversity. And as Gabe mentioned, integrating livestock is wonderful for employing some of those practices and keeping that profile very rich. I know Erin's going to cover this in a little bit more depth, but as you can see here, regenerative agriculture also has direct implications for our microbial pathways to health and well-being. And while I won't go over that in detail, that direct connection also goes into the gut-brain axis and essentially increases cognitive abilities as we choose to eat not only spinach over fries, but regenerates our cells through local spinach, which is why I like Popeye. So for me, the biodiversity and resilience that's needed to figure out all of those interconnected elements and ensure that there's synergy and balance between things, I try to do that every day through local produce, and then also on my 10-acre farm, where I try to make things circular and holistic in management and make sure that everything connects to one another. So I feed the chickens all of my kitchen scraps, and they give me highly nutritious and protein-rich eggs, which Gabe had a really nice photo of. And I add all of their waste onto the garden as fertilizer, which makes for a very robust microbial profile. And that then produces my next meal, essentially, and also feeds local farmers. And the pollinator mix, the clover and alfalfa and buckwheat that would be in the pasture area, that all goes to a local cattle farmer, and it provides great forage for the bees. And it also helps with pollinating the orchard and the garden flowers. And I have a wooded area, which warms me up 3 times. It does firewood in the winter, and when I have to haul it in, chop it, and also burn it, I then haul all of that ash back out to the garden in the spring and use it as a good source of potassium. So even as a small plot of land, I can work every day to help mitigate climate change through that soil profile. It can hold more carbon, more nitrogen, more nutrients, and keeps that soil organic matter very high so that I can stay alive longer. But it also helps with mapping the climate change connections. And that's part of why I started to develop the Connect theory, because part of our practice is making conscious decisions through that tree of connections that helps us to make change collectively. So additionally, when I choose to eat regeneratively, I'm actively choosing not to pay for diabetes and healthcare costs and perpetuating things that are offered through that high fructose corn syrup diet that currently is a staple of a lot of our nation right now. So having those decisions readily available for me gives me the utility and that self-sufficiency to be able to address the issues that are both in my body and my soil. And the biodiversity that Gabe referenced before is my margin of error. It's my adaptability, and essentially buffers me in the face of an ever-changing environment that is here today due to climate change. Next slide. Okay, so it's up to us to keep those solutions around and the adaptability Managing holistically and regeneratively means understanding as much about our systems to address problems when they arise and keeping biodiversity in our back pocket as our get out of jail free card. All right, so let's go back around to the beginning, and you'll have to humor me here for a minute. I just really like the laws of physics. So if those heralded laws of physics still apply today, let's say that matter is neither created nor destroyed, and for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So to me, that sounds like balance. If everything is connected, then perhaps we should focus on how it is all connected so that we can make more informed and conscious choices and decisions about how we achieve that balance. Understanding those connections can resolve the cognitive dissonance reflected in our choices by aligning our actions with the knowledge tree that's in that decision tree. And together, if we do it, we can have collective impact. All right, so I love this photo because truly everyone goes through things differently. Everyone has their challenges. Whether you are a child with diabetes, you administer healthcare, you're a farmer who provides our food, or you just eat every day. You're a link in this chain of connections. So as for me, I'm on my journey to thrive and survive. And I'll do that alongside my service dog who's in the photo here. And Sophie is the real hero. This is only a small portion of what I do. But just because my mortality holds me accountable for every decision that I make, I implore you to make those same decisions and regenerative connections and choices in your life that connect you and your dots to food, farm, and health so that we can have that collective impact together. And thank you for your time and attention. And I'll pass the mic over to Erin.
Yay, thanks so much for your powerful program, Anya. It was really great. I have the honor to introduce our next speaker. Erin Meyers is the founder and executive director of BASIL'S Harvest that she founded in 2017, a nonprofit that promotes human and planetary well-being through the power of regional food systems. She is also a clinical associate at the University of Illinois College of Medicine, Peoria, where she trains residents in the Cook Well, Eat Well, Live Well culinary medicine program she co-founded. Erin is chef and a registered dietitian and holds a Master of Sustainable Food System. She brings her expertise in bringing diverse leaders together to drive multi-stakeholder change in value chains in the food system. I so look forward to hearing what Erin has to share with us. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I really appreciate it. I want to also thank Chicago 350 and the other 350s around the United States for bringing Gabe and Anya and I together. I also just want to give a shout out to Gabe. I loved your talk, Gabe. It just right to the point. I want to take it in so many different directions. I just really appreciate that. And I really appreciate Anya. And I want to give a little backstory. Anya mentioned that we give this talk together, and we've done it a few times. We also have a third partner on our team, Carl Rozier, who's our microbial ecologist, and he designed some of our soil studies that we've done over the last 5 years. But what brought this talk together is Illinois had a soil health week. And, not everybody, many people talk about the theory, but they don't show the action that goes with it, whether it's talking about regenerative agriculture or talking about nutrition or this connection between the two. And Gabe highlighted what the data is showing with what's happening with his team. And that's really powerful, very powerful. And what we were trying to think about as we put this talk together is we have the data, we have the evidence of what's happening, but how do we put it into action? How do we show in a real life situation the impact that this can have? And Anya spoke up right away and said that she was very interested in providing and sharing her story of living with cystic fibrosis. And to that end, I am just very humbled to be in the same space with her. And I just want to recognize that and just to share that. And so we've taken this talk and we've always talked about climate change, but we've adapted it a little more to show the impacts not only to the planet, but also to human health. And so as the introductions said, Basil's Harvest, this is my passion. I feel like I've taken my 30 plus years of experience as a diabetes educator, as a small acreage farmer, and owning a food business where we contracted with farmers, and was able to pull everything together and had a group of people that were just as passionate as I am to grow Basil's Harvest. And when we think about regeneration, Gabe talked about regenerative agriculture. I view this as a system, and it's pulling all of it together. So we're really creating a regenerative food system. And this food system will heal our planet through healthier soil, improved water quality, and greater carbon sequestration. This regenerative food system can sustainably feed urban and rural communities with diverse, healthy food from their own regions. And this regenerative food system will improve community health, wealth, and well-being by reinvesting in local economies. So as we think about this, each time we sit down to a meal, there's an opportunity to support our well-being with food that nourishes our bodies, connects us to culture and community, and supports planetary health. It's a system. It's not linear. It's messy. And I think that's one of the things that, one of the major items that I've learned over this and working with our team and working with others, that it's not a straight line. It truly is. We're weaving a web to connect these silos of food, farm, and health. And so what I'm hoping to accomplish today is to share the importance of food choices on health, culture, and planetary health, emphasize what we've heard from Gabe and Anya regarding agriculture, walk through the essential functions of food for your health in all dimensions of wellness and considerations in choosing foods, and then addressing the current food systems and its risks and benefits. And lastly, talking about actions that are both healthy, sustainable, and resilient that connect the silos of food, farm, and health. So as you've heard today, our industrial food system is unsustainable. And our system right now is focused on the industrial food system. The system is one of the leading causes of deforestation, climate change, and biodiversity loss, all of which can result in compromised human health. This industrial food and agricultural system produces a plethora of ultra-processed foods, or food-like products that contribute to ill health and inequities. Many of these food-like products produced within this industrial model are highly processed, low in nutritional value, in excess of low-quality nutrients, and often characterized by synthetic chemicals from production or processing methods. The current data shows that numerous chronic diseases that plague our global community are driven by poor nutrition. 1 in 2 Americans have prediabetes or diabetes. 1 in 2 has a lifetime risk of cancer. And I want to emphasize where Anya was sharing a genetic disease, where this is also emphasizing food-related chronic diseases like diabetes, hypertension, obesity, heart disease, increased risk of cancers. If we look at ultra-processed foods, and when you go into a grocery store, the majority of the store is filled with ultra-processed foods. 67% of calories come from ultra processed foods for kids ages 2 to 18 years old. 67%. 57% of adult calories come from ultra processed foods. And 73% of the US food supply is ultra processed foods, highlighting that it's engineered food. It's hyper palatable, it's inexpensive, and it has a long shelf life. And it's addicting because that hyper palatability is science. It's a ratio of salt, fat, and sugar coming together that creates this hyper palatability. It's energy dense, not nutrient dense, and it's chemically enhanced. So, these statistics are significant as we look ahead at a healthcare system that is already beyond capacity for adequate care. In addition to pollution, environmental deterioration, ocean acidification, and extreme weather patterns directly affecting human health, these developments are also changing the quality of the food we eat, which may impact the nutritional status. Nutrient levels of common crops, as well as a number of fruits and vegetables, are lower in nutritional value today than what they were 50 years ago. So to hear Gabe talk about and show the data of how regenerative agriculture is improving the nutrient quality of our food is stellar. It's what we need to be paying attention to. Conventional growing practices, in addition to being resource intensive, which we've talked about, have led to depleted soil and biodiversity loss, both of which compromise the food system resilience and food security. In addition, and we're not saying this, but I think we need to emphasize everything that we're talking about today is impacted by climate change. These things, and so, but there is hope. But I just want to mention that before I go too much further. The loss of biodiversity means both reduced access to an abundance of nutrients in our food supply and fewer of the essential microorganisms that enable soil to continue to produce healthy crops and ensure sustained access to nourishment. The repercussions of an unsustainable food supply chain extends even further. It threatens livelihoods and contributes to malnutrition, with the greatest impact disproportionately affecting historically marginalized communities. Gabe had a picture of rural America dying, closed for business. The industrial food system is emphasizing those impacts, whereas as we look at a regenerative food system, regenerative agriculture, we're really talking about lifting up these rural communities who have lost so much. Oh, I want to go back to this slide really quick. So as a consumer, we are what we eat. We have 28 to 36 trillion cells. Of those, 330 billion cells are replaced daily. They're replaced daily. Anya really emphasized that connection between soil health and nutrient quality of the food, as did Gabe. But think about yourself and what's being replaced every day. And that's focused, and think about the foods that you eat every day. You vote with your dollar. You vote for a food system with every bite and sip, and that vote ripples. And we want it to ripple in clean water. So how do we do that? What I want to do in the next couple slides is I want to share what we know and what most of us are familiar with when we think about food and eating healthy is my plate. Okay. My plate. And before I did the research for this talk, even as a dietitian, I wasn't a big component of my plate because of the Western thought process behind it. We look at serving sizes, we look at food groups. But if we flip the paradigm, even with my plate, and we think about indigenous practices, eating the rainbow, That's where all those phytonutrients that Gabe was talking about live. That's where all the antioxidants live. We're eating the rainbow. With this plate, we're also establishing an eating pattern with our daily choices. The number of people who actually eat the recommended fruits and vegetables is staggering. We don't meet those recommendations. But the one thing that I found and really came to recognize with my plate is that even just looking at the plate, it emphasizes a balanced diet. Okay. It emphasizes eating a variety of foods, focusing on whole foods, including whole grains, and reducing the amount of fat, sugar, salt, alcoholic beverages. It does all that, but we wanted to go about 10 steps further, in all honesty. And when we look at that, in my mind, I'm thinking about a regenerative planetary health plate. Okay, this plate is from Eat Lancet. If you are not familiar with Eat Lancet, I encourage you to look them up. The information that they provide in connecting climate to health to sustainability, it's a great resource to have in your back pocket. But so as I think about a regenerative planetary health plate, not only am I thinking about food groups, but I'm thinking about those groups differently. Okay. I'm thinking about eating patterns that are going to support a healthy microbiome, that's going to support a healthy microbiome, gut microbiome. So thinking about how that food is grown in that healthy soil and how those practices, I'm going backwards, how those agricultural practices to get that healthy soil, to get those living organisms is regenerative agriculture, and how regenerative agriculture is supporting a system that can reduce the impact of climate change. And these eating patterns that support a sustainable food system and support a healthy planet. These eating patterns also build resilience, both environmental resilience, social impact resilience, in addition to economic resilience, which I'll talk about at the end of my talk. So we envision and we build a food system for the future. It's responsive, it's adaptable, and it's locally relevant. These eating patterns that safeguard the soil microbiome and our local ecosystem are leading to a healthy gut microbiome and improving our human ecology. And I wanted to show this to build it out a little bit. When we look at this plate on the right, it's color coded. So whole grains, thinking about whole grains from a regenerative food shed, but also regenerative agriculture. These grains are transitional crops within the rotation of most regenerative farmers. So whether it's oats, it could be rye, it could be wheat, but it's part of their rotation. So we're providing an additional market for these farmers. Starchy vegetables, you'll see that the recommendation is less. Dairy foods, you recognize that this is dairy foods, not milk. Okay, it's a combination of all dairy foods. Animal source protein. You'll also notice that wedge is small. And if we think about this, I'm a carnivore. I was vegetarian for 10 years, and then I went to culinary school and I had to taste everything. And then for Christmas, my kids bought me 2 pigs, and that just changed everything. But what I will say about that is that we want to think about less meat on our plate, but that meat is better meat. And it goes back to what Gabe was talking about. And then we have plant source protein or a plant forward diet choices. Then we also have unsaturated plant oils. Think monounsaturated fat, think olive oil, safflower oil, sunflower oil. Avoid vegetable oil, soybean oil, and corn oil. And then added sugars, because added sugars, when we think about added sugars, they're a part of our diet. They can be a healthy nutrition source while also adding flavor. So we think about honey, real maple syrup. We think about sugar that's being made with sugar cane versus GMO sugar beets, just as an example. So I wanted to build that out for you a little bit. So what does all this food do? Fruits, vegetables, and grains are prebiotics, and we need these prebiotics to feed the probiotics, okay? And so these carbohydrates and polyphenols and antioxidants, they have a place and they have a focus within our gut microbiome and what they're connected to, whether it's for lipid homeostasis or regulating blood sugar or thinking about our immune responses. Both, we need the prebiotics to feed the probiotics. The prebiotic table of microbiome-friendly foods, I'm just showing this: vegetables, fruits, nuts, whole grains, and beans. I think it's a beautiful slide, in addition to the importance. And I'm bringing this slide up again just to re-emphasize a couple things. One, the industrial agricultural model increases inflammation, increases the risk of non-communicable diseases, increases dysbiosis, which when we think about gastroenterology, it's there, something's broken in the system. It's not healthy. Versus regenerative agriculture with that increase in diversity and homeostasis and that holistic approach, improving our gut inflammation, is decreasing our risk of non-communicable diseases, and it's increasing the opportunity for a healthy microbiome. So action, and I just briefly want to go through this so we have time for questions. What can you do within your system? Increase your microbiome. Get connected to your local farmer, eating foods that are grown in your area from farmers who are growing sustainably and responsibly. You have higher nutrients, you have higher phytochemicals in those foods. Learn about the different foods and the different cultivars, increasing the biodiversity of your own diet, and talk to your farmers. The last thing I want to mention, I mentioned economics, and we didn't really talk a lot about this. This slide was put together from a dietitian in Wisconsin. U.S. farmers, the share that they get off of $1 is 14.9 cents for every food dollar spent. If we were to take 10% or $27 spent on local food directly from farmers, that puts over $64 million in the farmer's pocket each week. And this is a swath. This is Wisconsin. The local multiplier, because labor, they're hiring labor, they're spending within their communities. So this local multiplier, all of a sudden, in terms of the economics and supporting your local food shed, regenerative agriculture, that multiplier increases. Last action within your regional regenerative food shed: farm to school, farmers markets, farm to hospitals, a CSA. It's different ways that can support a regional food shed. Organic and regenerative agriculture supports the soil microbial health, and through food supports human microbial health. We're connected through food. And again, I just want to thank everybody for the invitation to be a part of this. This has been lovely.